Hello, everybody. Welcome to a bonus episode, which you might get a few more of these this month because money. Anyway, I'm Frank. I have been GMing for over 10 years. This is Charles.
Hey, I've been playing tabletop games, basically. Been playing mind games for the past 40 years, but specifically tabletop games I've been playing for the
How
past
have you
couple
been
years.
playing mind games since you were a baby?
You're clearly not a parent.
You were playing mind games before your kids existed?
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway,
Who doesn't?
we're going to be answering questions. Hopefully none of them are like that.
I hope not.
Yeah, so we're basically just going to be answering your questions in honor of us getting 1,000K at another undisclosed amount, because we'll figure it out. Maybe 5,000, maybe 10,000
Yeah.
subs. We'll do another Q&A where you can ask us anything, literally anything. You can ask Charles, really? There's no way you're married. And he'll be like, yes, I am. And then he'll prove you wrong.
Yeah. And everyone's surprised. Even I'm still surprised. So
Yeah, and then you could be like, Frank's married too, right? Now I could be like, anyway, Charles, what's the first question? I made myself
is
sad.
Frank available?
No. I'm not dating anyone via this YouTube channel. All right, the first actual question, Charles.
Comes from Tales from Elsewhere Games.
We don't know who that is at all.
Peter.
Really? You go fail. I'm sure he's never heard that before, ever in his life.
Give me some pictures of Spider-Man.
That's better.
All right, moving on. Peter asks, "What TTRPG have you loved the themes / world, but couldn't get into the rules themselves?" I can give you one.
Go ahead.
Our buddy James. I really liked Antagonist. I like the idea behind it. It was just so crunchy. It was one of those things like I love the idea. Like what I saw him explaining it, I'm like, oh, this sounds like a really cool game. And then I was very excited about playing it, and then it just felt like a board game, and I'm like, I wish, and again, he took that criticism into account, he's like, oh, makes sense, but I wanted so much to like, be like, oh, this could be a really cool game to play. And then it wasn't quite there.
Yeah, I'm more of a mechanics guy.
Yeah.
I will I like, especially when, and of course, Peter would know this because we had an entire episode about the two of us talking about how mechanics can be thematic and do stuff like that. I really like when the mechanics feed into the themes perfectly. So that means the inverse is true. If your mechanics have nothing to do with your theme, I will not like your game. And I hate to say it, that's Kids on Bikes for me.
Yeah.
I think the idea of like an 80s kids going around doing stuff in the town and they're uncovering like supernatural or scientific elements is really cool. It's a shame that it's in a system that like has so little going for it.
Mind you, Kids on Bikes for me is one of my favorites. I do enjoy it. I like their system. However, would I appreciate more to it? Absolutely. I would. If this is one of those things where I wish it was a little crunchier. Like had a little more. Because again, there's really no combat. I mean, you could have combat in it, but it's it's mostly story driven, and it's basically how you feel. It takes a lot. Again, it's a fun game to play if you just want to get around, get a handful of people together and play a game. You don't have to do a whole lot of research into it. Again, I'm running a game right now with my cousin, her husband, and my wife, and we're just we're playing. They're enjoying it. Again, I'm trying to make the story compelling, because to me, if you don't have a compelling story for Kids on Bikes, it's not going to be a fun game.
Absolutely. All right, next question. So this comes from Elder Goblin Games. What's up? This is a regular, and he's also in one of the Discords that we post on.
Woo!
So, I should probably cut to Charles for that part.
Woo!
He asks, what does your bare minimum prep look like? So we'll start with Charles, because, I mean, you're technically GMing.
Yeah, for sure. Question. Absolutely. My bare minimum prep, you're looking at it. This is me prepping. It's all happening inside here, guys.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give a better, more detailed, nuanced answer, I guess. I have found that this works the best for me. I am very much a build the outline, don't fill in the details kind of a guy. In writing, they talk about it, like the plotter versus the planters or whatever. Do you write by the seat of your pants and just go for it, improv as it goes, and figure out what happens there, or do you detail everything? The problem with detailing everything, especially in an RPG where the players are supposed to be the decision makers, it becomes railroady pretty quickly. I used to be that way. Mind you, I used to be like, this is the best way to do it. And luckily, those people still like me to some extent. Zach Brooks, Zach Savory, Brett, thank you guys for being with me all this time. And Mike, if you're watching this as well, I miss you, Mike. Hope your kid's doing well. But basically, I really wanted, like, I had in my head, this is how the story has to go. And luckily, by the grace of God somehow, and by great dice rolls, the best moments were things that I wasn't anticipating and wasn't expecting. And so I've learned then to be like, okay, I can come up with an outline or an idea.
Yeah.
And then allow the players to react to that. So, for example, instead of it being like, all right, I'm going to have the villain kill your brother in front of you, and it'd be like this really big thing of like, oh no, my only living sibling, yada yada, how dare you. I'll give a moral conundrum instead. Hey, you reach a fork in the road, a literal fork in the road. You can either go fight your greatest nemesis ever, or you can save your only remaining sibling. Which do you do? And to me, oh, so much better, so much more juicy. So I spend, my minimum prep is really, let me think of the outline.
Yeah.
And I just did that for Traveler. I was at my mom's house for Thanksgiving, and I'm like, let me like actually take the time now that I'm away from all these distractions and just like plot out what I want the idea to be. And I'm like, okay, I know the overarching theme. I know who the antagonist is going to be. I have boom, 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 all these plots figured out. What the party does to get to those points, I have no idea. Yeah. And we're going to see what happens. And so that's kind of how I do it. I'll have sandbox elements where I'm like, if they go here, this is what could happen. If they go here, this is what could happen. I also try to say like, hey, like make it obvious. Hey, you only have so much time to do something, right? In our pirate campaign, I made it very clear. I'm like, hey guys, some clocks are ticking. And like, if you just, you know, dilly-dally and make your way doing whatever you want, the villains are going to get their way and they're going to destroy everything. Yeah. So luckily, ironically, you guys were like, nope, we're going to do this immediately. I'm like, okay.
Don't tell us how to live our lives.
Yeah. So ultimately for me, it's a lot of front loading. I do a lot of prep in the first few sessions because I want to make sure I get like, what is the plot? Who is the antagonist? What are some of the key points I want to hit? What are some interesting things?
Yeah.
And then from there, it's more like from a session to session thing being like, oh, that was an interesting choice. Let's explore that a little bit. Or, Charles's character hasn't had the spotlight yet. Let me put the spotlight on him a little bit.
And a more detailed response for me would be very much how Frank does things. I do something similar. Like, again, I like having a general outline. Again, it depends if I'm doing a one-shot or if I'm doing a longer campaign. If I'm doing a longer campaign, I try to build out some lore if I can. Not a whole lot, just enough where it's like, if a player asks me a question about a faction or a group of people or a character, I'll have something to say about it. You know, like it may be something like I actually have a little notebook now that I've been using for my kids on bikes where I'm taking notes from as the players tell me stuff. I'm like, okay, cool. And now I know what you fear, and now I know what you know. So I try to incorporate that into my stories, into my games.
Now you play a lot more than I do as a player.
Yeah.
Is there any prep you do as a player going into anything?
Yes, I'm always thinking about like how, again, I don't want to be the main character in any game. Like being the main character in my own life's scary enough as it is.
I'm just gonna write that down for.
Yeah, right. It's like, Charles, you wake up and you are you. I like to goof off, as you can probably tell. I like to be silly and stuff like that. But there are times too where like I do want dramatic moments. You know, so I try to think of like what's the best way I can contribute to the story? You know, what is something my character's going through? You know, so and part of that, it deals with really knowing, where your character fits in the story. Like Frank mentioned earlier, Charles hasn't had any really time to talk about what's going on with him. You know, like, again, maybe my character has this ongoing struggle, and and I want there to be something that resembles that in the game. So like, I might think of like, maybe I've been thinking a lot more about my, again, this is just an example, dead parents, because everyone's got a tragic,
Sorry, I just didn't think you would bring up your dead parents who are still alive. That's just
my dead parents who are still alive. Somehow they survived.
Yeah, I mean, that is I don't think you as a player have to do too much prep.
Yeah.
Unless you're doing an actual play, in which case it's more just like, what would my character do? Let me think about it a little bit. But I think most people won't have to worry about that.
Yeah. So this one comes from Odin's Key Gaming, another one of our buds.
Hi. We're gonna get it. Well, they have the Indominant RPG coming out,
which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, we're gonna have to try that out at some point.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that in the future.
Yeah, they have a playtest coming out too. We'll probably do something similar with like Peter's, where it's like, hey, we got to playtest it. Here's what we think. So,
all right. What are each of your favorite genre of tabletop RPGs besides fantasy?
I referred to you to my previous points about how I like mechanics.
Yeah.
What about you, Charles? Is there a genre that you would hear and you'd instantly want to play?
Supernatural horror for sure. I like things where I like the unknown, creepy vibes. Again, I'm really into horror movies.
We gotta get you playing Call of Cthulhu at some point.
Yeah, I really. Oh, we talk about it on this channel. We talk about it, during games. I really want to play. I want to play Tin Candles. There's so many games out there. Again, that's why I kind of like Kids on Bikes, is because it has that element. Because my game that I'm running right now, like I told my players, I'm like, imagine if Stranger Things, Supernatural, Scooby Doo, and there was another. There's a show called From. If like I'm trying to take elements from all of those different things, and like imagine all that kind of mishmashed into the small town. I want there to be an uncertainty. I love not knowing what's around the corner. I love being held in suspense. I love having that moment in games. Like again, it's the best feeling in the world. I love being surprised. I
like it when things niche down because it makes the mechanics more interesting. The Avatar role-playing game is very cool.
That was so much fun.
We got to play that recently because one of our players wasn't able to make it, and we were like, you know what, let's just play it, because we had one person who was gonna be late. It was this whole thing, and it was quick character creation. We got into it. Super fun game. Really enjoyed that. I love Masks, not because it's superhero, but because it's niche down again, right? You're teenage superheroes trying to figure out your identity while also trying to figure out your powers. Yeah. Great. Love that stuff. And City of Mist is a really interesting thing because, again, it's this idea of like you're detectives with supernatural powers, and it's stuff that you wouldn't inherently think about as genre. And you're like, oh, I can, like, you just come up with things where it's like, in Mist, you're based off of like fictional characters and stuff like that. Yeah. So you could literally think of like, oh, there's an entire crime boss where Alice from Alice in Wonderland is the head of the crime boss, right? And then like all of the others, it's like, oh, there's the Mad Hatter, and and like the fun is figuring out like, oh, this is who this is, and that, there's some fun in that.
So, and actually brought up the superhero genre. Again, I'm a huge like Spider-Man fan, big nerd. I love comic books. And I would love to play more games of that nature. Unfortunately, we've only played a couple of them where where we kind of just touched on it. I know I want to play Masks. We've talked about that, but I also know Kids on Bikes is going to be doing Kids in Capes.
Yeah,
which I'm going to take a crack at later.
Maybe if there's more interest in it, I don't know.
Again, I understand where Frank is coming from when it comes to Kids on Bikes and their system. If they add even a little more crunch, and that's something I'm actually in the process of doing, is I'm actually trying to add crunch to my game so it can be more
interesting.
Yeah, well, you want consequences,
yeah.
And it feels like Kids on Bikes, like there are consequences, and
because there's no health system,
and
like there's no way to be like you're down, like there,
even like with Call of Cthulhu, you have the sanity,
well, I mean, you have health and sanity,
exactly.
Yes.
So like I want my characters, I want my players to feel invested and stuff like that.
So this next question comes from another completely different video. It had to do with how do you challenge overpowered characters, and I used the metaphor of like Superman, where like the most interesting Superman stories are the ones where he's challenged morally rather than like physically. And so the question then became, on the topic of Superman not killing anyone, what are your thoughts on being a pacifist in D&D? I am not a fan of systems that, D&D or otherwise, that if you can't make a pacifist or a non-combat character viable in combat, like if you can't do that, I think it's not it's a combat system. It's not an RPG system, right? That's why we like Star Wars. Mm-hmm. We had a diplomat who, yes, he would use a blaster every so often, but like he could also convince people to just leave the fight, or he could bribe people or do things like that. I think that's really great. I'm looking forward to the Cosmere RPG where they've intentionally said, here is Steris from one of the books. She never fights, but we want to make her viable as a character to create. How can we do that? Love that. So going to specifically 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, there is a redemption paladin class, which is all about if you take damage, you can deal damage to someone else. Mm. And so in a way, you're being a pacifist. You're not fighting them. It's like they're harming themselves more than you're like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just kind of, it doesn't work well in the system. And also you can't get it to level 3 of the paladin. So it's like 3 levels before you're murdering everybody. Yeah. So it doesn't really matter there.
Back when I was in Texas for a long time and Frank had to make do with guest stars. Did a one shot for my cousin and her kids and her husband and stuff like that. And her one daughter did not like combat. And I didn't realize that until towards the end of the one shot. And it was kind of mentioned to me. I'm like, okay. So So I started giving her options to, well, okay, we don't have to fight this one out. We can, how do you, like, basically give them the option, like, how do you want to resolve this? What would you like to do? So I wanted to make sure she had the opportunity to play the game how she wanted to. And I think it's important because, again, when you're playing any game and you're running the game, it's important to listen to your players and see what they want. So I think it's like Frank said, if there's not a way to run a pacifist character, in a combat system, you got to find a way in order to really make the game viable. I think you got to make that work,
or at least like a character that doesn't rely on combat to get things done.
Yeah.
Like I'm
maybe of a saboteur.
A saboteur, like Evan in Tales from Elsewhere, when we were playing that, wanted to like push people off the train and like do this or that because he didn't have a weapon, and using your fists is terrible in that system. So like, I'm fine with that. Is like, as long as you have enough options, because that's the thing, is that if it's just you have to murder something to solve the problem, that's how your players are going to look at everything. Like, we have that problem with our friend Jeffrey, where every problem is a nail to be hammered, and it's like, no, this is you could like just talk to this guy and he can give you the information. You're like, but what if I kill him instead? It's like, no. And so that's the problem with like Dungeons and Dragons. It's really a combat system. Like, you don't resolve a conflict outside of combat. It's really like, okay, we saved the kingdom. It's like we convinced the king not to throw us in jail, but then suddenly, like, we have to fight this thing because otherwise, what's the point of the character's name?
And like what you were saying about the moral conundrum too, and like, again, with Jeffrey's character, it was almost like, I'm going to solve this problem with my fist regardless.
Yeah.
Like, there was no changing that character's mind, and I really think for character growth to happen, again, it really depends on what kind of player you are.
Yeah.
Me as a avid storyteller, and like, I love a good story. I want my character to feel conflicted. I don't want my character to have all the answers. Sometimes I'm going to want to use charisma, even though it's maybe my dump stat,
Because that's what your character would do. Yeah,
like,
it makes it to where like choice matters. And that's really what I value most.
Yeah.
Next question is from Profit Troll? I don't know. We'll find out. What unique trait would you pick about each other as a player or GM that makes them fun to have at the table? We have to be nice to each other, Charles. What's something you like about me as a GM, and what's something I like about you as a player?
So I know what I like about you as GM, and again, I always talk you up when it comes to GMing. Again, Frank really was my first experience to an experienced GM, and I like how he takes the story into consideration. I like how he takes our background. Like, he wants us to be a part of the story. It's not just, hey, I'm going to tell you a story and you're just going to have to deal with what I say. It's like, you let us make our own decisions. And again, and if it's something that's super important, you do try to guide us. And again, I try to match that energy as a player too. I know sometimes I can get a little off.
Yeah, like in the Avatar game where you were just being an old kooky man, and I'm like, you're literally one of your principles is about sharing your like expertise with people, and you're like, I'm just this weird senile old man.
It was fun. I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Well, that's the thing too, and I can recognize that as a player. Sometimes I tend to just, I want to be silly, We
were all tired that day. So
yeah.
it's
but again, and I will tell you, if we end up doing our when we end up doing our let's plays and
spoilers. I was going to answer another question later on.
I mean,
what I like about Charles is
he spoils things.
What I like about Charles is that I think you are able to match what the GM is giving, and you match what they need as a player. Like, you're very adaptable to the type of GM you have, because I've been able to see you with other people, whether it was our friend Zach Brooks, whether it's Hunter in the Lancer game. You are good at being like, this is what that GM values, so that's the kind of player I'm going to be.
Yeah.
And so I think you do a really good job of being like, this is what you guys value, that's how I'm going to play it. Like in Lancer, you're like, I'm going to sit down with the GM and make this character that's really optimized and really good, which is what Hunter values.
Yeah.
Versus like Zach Brooks and I, who are more story based, you're like, I'm going to sit down with you guys and be like, here's the story I want to tell. And so I very much appreciate that about you.
Thank you. Again, I try my best.
I have to say something mean now. You smell
like roses.
I was gonna say good.
Good.
Well,
you smell good.
That's another SpongeBob reference you don't get.
I'm sorry.
Next
old.
question.
Next question. What's on your band snack list? Either because of the aroma, dust trails, or other considerations.
It depends on how much of my stuff is being used. If it's like, we're using my minis, I'm gonna be the only one touching them, and then you guys can eat whatever the heck you want. I don't care. But if it's like my specific dice and my like a special character sheet or something like that, if it's like you're using my things, please nothing that leaves like oil or residue or anything like that. Also, I just from a fact that I played with people who have drinking too much alcohol at the table. I don't like alcohol at the table because it can make a lot of people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And usually people don't know when to stop. So
eating it leaves, again, like Cheetos, potato chips. Again, I'm fine with you eating them. I am fine with eating them. But like Frank says, like if you're going to be touching stuff, like especially if it's my stuff, be mindful of that. Have a napkin nearby or something at minimum. I know, like, I snack. Like, I don't think there's been very many days where I've gone to Frank's house to play a game where I didn't have something to eat. Usually because we play around dinner time. So, like, I'm usually grabbing something to go. I'll either be eating in my car, and sometimes, you get a greasy burger, or pizza. Sometimes I'll we'll get pizza for everyone at to play who's playing. But typically it's, if it's greasy or if it leaves something behind, just be considerate, because I'm not gonna tell you can't eat, but I'm like, to me that's more of a, based on our group, I think that's more of a, you're just starting, like you just started your group and you don't know everyone too well. Yeah, and with alcohol, I don't mind alcohol, but yeah, I don't want people getting drunk and playing, because it ruins your inhibitions and stuff like that. Could be funny, but it also could ruin friendships.
I understand some people want to get looser.
Yeah.
But like, nah.
Yeah.
I've literally seen people where I'm like, you are taking over the game and not letting anyone else play. It's not fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Moving on.
This isn't a question, but it has a question mark on it. So we're going to talk about it from the Savage Goose. Talking on the video where we play tested Tales from Elsewhere. He said, apocalyptic Western sounds like Deadlands. The implied question is, why haven't you guys played Savage World yet? And the implied answer is time.
We have so little time.
So little time. He has kids. Has kids.
I've got a full-time job, a wife, kids, and then like I do stuff with my family. It's nuts. And then like literally, because of the time of year it is too, my kids' birthdays fall within weeks of Christmas.
Oh, I am so sorry.
It's
to be fair, that is your fault.
100%. But this is the time I feel the most broke and like unable to do things.
And we're doing extra videos.
Yeah.
And we're doing extra videos, so that's going to be
a
lot of time.
So.
Anyway, quickly on the same video, we had a guy, Lucosaurus, ask, what was one do to get a review on our channel? So you can reach us at whatistabletop at Gmail. We're not going to guarantee we're going to review anything. There's certain people that we have made guarantees to, like with James and and Antagonist, where we specifically did that because he wanted feedback because he was getting started on a new system.
Right. And
with Peter, we have a good relationship with him, so we just wanted to, hitch on the bandwagon. I mean, steal some of his views. I mean, do the game with him because we're friends.
We love you, Peter, and all your many subscribers that jumped on board.
So I know, like Lucosaurus, I think it did actually reach out to us because he has a system which is going to be very interesting to look into because he wants it to be the most customizable character system there is. So we'll look into that at some point. Odin's Key Gaming wants us to look at Indominant, and then there's like a lot of different things like that. So ultimately it comes down to, is our playgroup willing to try it out?
Yeah.
That's a big thing. If we can get to the point where we can do this a little more full time, then maybe we can start paying people, and then it's a little easier to justify it. But also what's tough is too, especially with RPG systems no one's ever heard of, they don't get views. Yeah. And so if we're doing a review of that system, we are almost anticipating it tanking a little bit because of that. Like even when we do reviews of systems people have heard about, unless it's Candela Obscura, no one's gonna really watch it.
We did the Fallout one did not do great.
No, it did okay for the time.
Yeah, for the time. Yeah,
not now.
It was one of our newer videos too, but yeah.
All right, staying on that same video, talking about the playtesting Tales from Elsewhere. How far into functionality of the game is needed to playtest? I mean, are we just playtesting segments of a game, then just kind of making up the rest to see how it flows? Basically, at what point, if you're an RPG designer, do you playtest? Peter hopped into the comments and said, anytime you can playtest, you should playtest. The hardest part of anything, and James with Antagonist even talked about this, is getting the right people to playtest.
Correct.
I've been fortunate enough because I have a friend. His name is Pedro P. Mendoza. I call him future award-winning board game designer Pedro P. Mendoza. Mm-hmm. He's designed a board game, and he's also helped several companies to do playtesting stuff. And so I got to talk with him about like, how do you value that feedback? Because let's be honest, people can give feedback and it's terrible. They can say, I hate this. And you're like, well, what do you hate? Why do you hate it? Is it the feel? Is it a specific mechanic? Is it the numbers? Is it this or that? And if you're not careful when you're designing a game and doing stuff like that, you can get the literal wrong impression.
Right.
Right? Like D&D just released a new edition this year. And they were going to do some really interesting changes that I thought would have been better for the game. But then they opened it up to everybody and they're like, oh, well, most people don't like it. So we're going to go back to the original things and just tweak small things there. And I'm like, well, but who are your playtesters? They're the people who are interested in this kind of stuff. So you're inherently creating a bias there.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that. It's hard to find the right playtesters. But if you can find a group of people that you're like, I like how you give feedback, or it's like, I know there's a good variety of people with you. Right. Where it's like, you have the guy who cares about combat. You have the guy who cares about role playing. You have the guy who cares about this or this or this. Then it can be a little bit more interesting and refreshing.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are a playtester, if you're going to agree to playtest something, when you are giving feedback, make sure you're giving the right kind of feedback. Don't say you don't like something because, like that again, well, I'll briefly make this comment. Star Wars. I'm not really huge into Star Wars, but it doesn't make it a bad game. I still enjoyed it. There are elements about it that I like. If I were going to critique it, I would critique it in ways that the things I liked about it, not just the things I didn't like about it. I think it's important to make sure when you're giving feedback, you are giving honest and genuine feedback, not just complaining about, well, I didn't like this because I didn't get to punch something as much as I wanted to. That's not good feedback.
Or conversely saying like, oh, well, this system is broken because of this, and it's like, you don't know what they're still doing if they're only giving you a part of it, right?
Yeah.
Like when we got to playtest Peter's thing, I wasn't saying this is broken. I said the player felt this way.
Yeah.
The player did not like the lack of options here. And he's like, oh, that's because I forgot to add in this thing to the playtest document. And it's like, great. Awesome. We got to find that out. Hey, this felt off, right? Like we had a friend who was rolling and shooting people and it's like, it felt too easy to shoot things.
Yeah.
That seems weird. And he's like, again, forgot another rule, right? That's kind of the important thing to go over is instead of saying this is broken because I know how game design works, stating like this feels wrong. This feels overpowered. And then they can probably correct you and be like, oh, we already had a system in place. We just forgot to tell it to you. Or, oh, that's a fair point. We'll look into that.
Another question here is, what do you think is the next step for your channel? Are there other niches, styles, or content types you're interested in exploring?
You want to do a long-term campaign kind of similar to Critical Role. Most likely Dungeons & Dragons. That's what gets the views. And so we would do something like that. And it would be us in our play group having some fun. And then what we would love to do if we get to that point after that is doing kind of what Dimension 20 does, where that's when we can really experiment and do like different systems, maybe tie it in. Like apparently there's a new Avatar show coming out at some point soon. Like there's leaks coming out for a new Avatar show after the Legend of Korra.
Oh, like an animated one.
Yeah, an animated one. Oh. So we could like time with the release of that and do a small like 6-episode run of the Avatar one. So, ultimately, in order to even get to that point, we're going to need financial support. We're going to need more subscribers and viewers. So if you know anybody who would like our content, share our content with everybody. We really appreciate it. We know some of you already let us post in your Discords. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Odenki Gaming. You guys are great for that. We really appreciate it. But tell your friends, spread the word. We will eventually have some sort of other means of financially compensating us down the line next year for sure. So be on the lookout for that. But I think immediately, the thing we want to do is at least a one shot.
That's the thing too. We want to make sure we are giving our audience what they want, as well as being committed to what our channel should be at this point. So, but we get. Just like any other channel, we want to grow and do more stuff. Again, we're really interested in doing a long-term campaign, doing those little mini campaigns like Dimension 20 does. And like and interacting with you guys even more stuff like But yeah, that's basically what we're looking into. Again, we want to do more stuff. It's about time and money.
All right, the final question: what is Tabletop?
Stay witty.
Yeah. No, that was how.